Welcome everyone to the Women in Tech Alumni Identity Talk brought to you by the Offices of Diversity, Engagement and Inclusion and Development and Alumni Relations. My name is Hannah. I'm studying cybersecurity and I will be your moderator today. And we'll begin shortly. Alrighty. Time to introduce our panelists. First, we have Adanna Nedd. She is a 2021 IST grad. She is a gamer, a games writer, narrative designer, and games researcher. Next, we have Maria Verardi Young, a 2014 senior product management manager with Microsoft. Also speaking today is Sara Gori, 2008 director of security architecture with Acquia. Welcome, ladies. Thank you so much for being part of such an amazing panel. If you could each share a little bit more about yourself, and we'll start with some questions. Adanna, would you like to start us off?
Yes, my name is Adanna Nedd. I am a 2021 graduate of the College of IST. I'm currently a games writer, narrative designer, and games researcher, as Hannah mentioned, previously working on titles including Spirit Swap and Kiss You, and I'm really happy to be back at Penn State and chatting with other IST students.
Thank you. Maria?
Hi, thanks for having me today. My name is Maria Young. I graduated from IST in 2014, and I immediately started at Microsoft after I graduated, and I've been there for 10 years now in a variety of roles. Started as a consultant, then I moved into what's called a technical account manager role, which is now called a customer success account manager. And then finally, now I am in a product manager role, and the product I manage is an AI-powered cybersecurity tool called Microsoft Copilot for Security. I still live in Pennsylvania, born and raised in Pittsburgh, and now I live on the other side of the state in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania.
Awesome. Thank you. And Sara?
Thank you. I'm Sara Gori. I graduated from Penn State College of IST in 2008. Right after school, I joined GE's IT leadership program, which is a 2-year rotational program, where one of those 6-month rotations was on their cyber incident response team, their CERT. And I had no cyber experience before that. The major hadn't started in the College of IST yet. And I thought it was just about the coolest thing I think I could ever have done. So that set the stage for 15 more years in cybersecurity and going strong.
Awesome. Thank you. Just some quick housekeeping things. If you have any questions for our panelists, please share them in the Q&A section of the Zoom. We'll be checking that regularly and we'll do our best to answer all the questions. And then Kim will be sharing all the LinkedIn profiles of our panelists today so you can all connect. So now we'll start with the first question. Can you each all share with us about your career journey and how you got your first job? We'll start with Adanna first.
So for me, after I graduated, while I was at Penn State, I was doing games research as part of both the Millennium Scholars Program and the iSchool Inclusion Institute, since it was a requirement to graduate. And as I was doing more games research and learning how players interacted and represent themselves in virtual environments, I realized I was a lot more interested in doing things on the development side instead of the research side. So before in 2021, right before I graduated, I started looking online into different resources and how to get into games writing and games development. And then I was able to get on a small project known as Recommendation Dog. And I was also able to start on Spirit Swap, which you can wishlist on Steam right now and is coming out later this year. So it's been a really fun journey in working in different games and seeing how they work. And speaking at the Game Developers Conference last week was really great.
Maria?
Sure, yeah. So a little bit about my career journey. Basically, when I was younger, like in high school, I was like, oh yeah, I want to be a developer, like I want to be a coder. That sounds so cool. Got into my first Java class, and quickly realized, okay, yeah, this is not for me. So one thing I really love about ISD is that there's so much more out there in the field of technology other than just developing. So you can really find a lot of opportunities. And what happened for me was, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I just went to the fall career fair at IST during my senior year and just started talking to all of the different booths, all of the different companies that were there. I saw the Microsoft booth and it had a huge line like out the door, and I was thinking, there's no way I'm waiting in that line. And also there's no way that Microsoft would hire me anyways. That's my imposter syndrome coming out there. And as I was walking by, not getting in line, one of the Microsoft recruiters ran around and kind of, grabbed me and said, hey, are you going to apply for Microsoft? And I was like, I wasn't planning on it, but sure. And then kind of the rest is history. They offered me some interviews. So I flew out to their headquarters, had my interviews, and then once they said at the end of the interviews, we're going to hire you, they asked, do you want to be a consultant, which is a more technical role, or do you want to be a technical account manager, which is more of an account management role? I wanted to be the account manager, but I said, you know what? I'm working for a technology company. I should take a technical role first, and then I can always switch into a non-technical role later. So, and those few years that I was a consultant were very, very challenging for me. Like for example, they said, you're going to be doing exchange migrations. And at the time I said, what's exchange? And exchange, if you don't know, is Microsoft's backend email technology. So yeah, those first few years as a consultant were very challenging, but then I found that it helped me a ton when I later moved into that technical account manager role to have started out in a more technical role and then moved into a less technical role. Finally, when I was in that technical account manager role, I started feeling like I had maybe mastered the role. I was getting a little bit bored. And as soon as you start feeling that feeling, I would definitely recommend starting to look around and explore and talking to more people and seeing what else is out there. So finally, I did switch into a product manager role, which is the role that I am currently in.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Sara?
Yeah, so like I said in my intro, I went to GE and their incident response team ultimately. After I finished school, that was my first role. And, got that first job really is thanks to the internship program that I had through IST that set me up for that first job. And so I was on the incident response team for about 2 to 3 years doing network analysis, responding to incidents. And, I kept asking, why are we seeing these trends? Hey, I've responded to the same incident X number of times. So I started kind of advocating for fixing things up front, which ultimately led me to an architecture role where I was focusing on what can we do across the enterprise to fix things at scale. And that kind of set me up. I've had some kind of architect focus for pretty much the past 10 to 12 years now, where it's always focusing on these large scale challenges and what we can do to change. At the time, cloud wasn't really a thing yet. So at the time I was focusing on endpoint and mobile security and, how we can do that to get in front of compromises and security issues. And when people started adopting cloud, I was like, well, this sounds interesting and like it's going to change everything. I should probably understand how this works. So whenever there was an opportunity to get deeper into it, I volunteered. It felt like a great place for my career. And I think I really hit that on the nose because it's just been a great place to be over the years.
Awesome. Thank you. So right now we're here to talk about your worth. Can you please share with us how you determine what that is, or if you have, and how you've handled issues with pay equity or gender discrimination in your career? We can start off with you, Sarah.
Yeah, so this is really important. I think it is, first of all, really important to distinguish the difference between your personal worth and what you're talking about in compensation in the workplace. A lot of people tie how much they make to their value as a person, their value as a professional, and there are negotiating points you can make to what you bring to the table to support compensation. But I think one of the best things I did for myself was work on the idea of separating my value, my personal value, from how much money I make. Not only was that better for me in my headspace, but it also helped me negotiate better because I wasn't getting as emotionally tied in to what I was asking for and what I was challenging for. Kind of case in point to that, there was a point in my career where I I went after a promotion at a job, and with 8 years of service, excellent performance reviews, I got passed over, and a cis white man who'd been with the company for 2 years, 2 years out of school, got the promotion instead. So I started looking for a job, and when I got my next offer, I asked for a 50% raise. Because when I did research, I saw that I was below the min in my compensation range on Glassdoor. And the recruiter just chuckled and agreed to the number I asked for, which made me realize just how undercompensated I was. Um, so I don't think I would have been brave enough to ask for that increase if I had been very wrapped up in what my worth was. Like, is it okay to ask for that much more money? And so I think that that really helped give me the courage to ask for that. And I'd say never be afraid to ask for more.
Thank you. Adanna?
I agree with what Sarah mentioned about not tying your worth to how much you make and also not being afraid to advocate for yourself, especially if you have a lot of transferable skills that you may have not done a lot of things in tech, but you still learned a lot of things. Like for a lot of my IST and research courses, I wasn't exactly coding all the time, but I still learned how to collaborate with teams, how to design outline briefs for deliverables, which were really good in transferring when I went into games. And sometimes interviews I've done, people have seen a lot of the games I work on. They're not as big as AAA. They're a lot more cutesy looking, and they're like, oh, do you have like the actual skill to write for these games that we're asking you for? And just because that's what on my portfolio and what you can see from like what my LinkedIn, that doesn't mean that's all I'm capable of. So knowing your true worth and not being able to advocate for yourself is extremely important.
Thank you. Maria?
Yeah, sure. I definitely agree with what both of the other panelists said so far. I would say in terms of knowing your worth, particularly early in your career, like right after you graduate, that imposter syndrome can definitely step in at that time. Like, for example, when I joined Microsoft and they told me that I would be doing Exchange Online migrations, and I didn't even know what Exchange was. I definitely had that imposter syndrome, but I looked back and thought, okay, like what am I good at? I know that I'm really good at taking notes. I'm good at writing summaries and writing. So I've really focused on that. And over time, my team kind of began to respect that and lean on me for that too. Sometimes they would say, oh, like I missed this on the call, but I'm sure you probably have it in your notes because you take the best notes. So like finding ways to make yourself appear more valuable to your team and to yourself, that really helped me a lot. And then over time you'll learn the technical stuff or whatever else is required in your job description. So definitely start with what you know, and that's kind of once you start, not that you should get validation from external sources from other people, but it can help to know that you're on the right track. So start with things that you know that you're good at and kind of build up to what you think the job requires. And then in terms of another tip that I have is like like Sarah, I started in a college hire program at Microsoft. So we had a class of, a couple dozen people who started at the same time, and 3 of us were placed on the same team with the same manager. And we kind of made an agreement with each other that we were going to be very transparent with each other about our pay. So each time it came around for bonus season or whatever, we would say like, okay, I got this. What did you get? And kind of having those people and the 2 people on my team, they were both men who I was comparing with, and I did get paid less than them. I got a smaller bonus than them, and had a conversation with my manager and to explain like, oh, what did they do that I didn't do, and things like that. But definitely pay transparency is important. If people are comfortable sharing, I would encourage having conversations with them to know what other people on your team might be making. And there's also something called a compa ratio, which I didn't find out about until about 5 years into my career. You can ask HR for this if it's not readily available to you, but basically a compa ratio tells you like how much you're being paid compared to the average person in that role. So that can be another really useful tool for knowing your worth and if you're being underpaid.
Thank you so much for sharing all those tips. From what I've heard from you all so far, is doing research is important to figuring out um, basically pay equity. Thank you for sharing all that. The next question is, was there a time during your career or life that stands out as when you were the most uncertain? If so, describe a situation and how you move forward with that. We can start off with you, Marie.
Sure. Okay. So, not to make this too dark of a topic, but about 5 years into my career, I got diagnosed with brain cancer, and I had to go through 15 months of treatment, and it really affected the way that I think and the way that I work. And, I need some help now from assistive technology. Like I need subtitles and things to keep on track. And when I came back from that, I worked during treatment, which I do not recommend. So if anyone's in that situation, please take the time off. Do not work during treatment. But I came back and I had this whole renewed sense of imposter syndrome. Like, what if I can't perform as high as I could before all of this happened? Now I have, essentially this disability. How do I manage that? And I found that for me, what really helped me move forward was to be very transparent with my team about what I was going through and the accommodations that I needed in order to be able to succeed. And I find that not just with a topic like this, but anytime something's coming up about the way that you work or if you need help, I definitely recommend being transparent with your team and letting people know when you need help. And that kind of, that was a very uncertain time for me, but the way I moved forward was to really lean on my team and also offer them help. And now even across Microsoft, people that I don't even know come to me and say like, hey, I was just diagnosed with this. Like, can you share your experience? Can you walk through this? So it's kind of been an opportunity to help other people. But definitely I was questioning my worth a lot when I came back from that to see if I could still be as effective of an employee. But move forward by leaning on your team and your friends and family, I would say.
Thank you. Adanna?
So, a time I think that I had a lot of imposter syndrome was definitely in 2022-ish when like even though I was still working on Spirit Swap, I wasn't really in a few like other smaller games. I wasn't really getting a lot of other work. There as like currently there have been like a lot of different layoffs in the games industry, and there's been a lot of discussion on how healthy and sustainable it is. And during that time I was wondering, is this really the right industry for me? Should I move and pivot to something else? Should I pivot into a more tech focused role? But as I was doing that, I realized as I was interacting with other people in the industry, especially other Black colleagues, the importance of just being a Black person in games, because that's not something that a lot of people really see. And it's important because Black people have been in games for like ever, but it's only like now that it's become really visible. It's become a talking point. A lot of studios are now focused on games with Black characters. So, as Maria mentioned, leaning on your colleagues and your family and your support team is really, really important when you're deciding what you want to do.
Thank you. Sara?
Yeah, so there was a period earlier in my career, I said I was on the incident response team, but I kept noticing these trends and issues that we saw and what were we going to do about it. There was a transitional period before I became an architect where I was actually, for a while, had the project manager role because I was really pushing along, fixing these things and chartering these programs to actually get things done. But I wanted to move towards that architecture role. Or rather, I had a lot of respect for the architecture team, but hadn't even admitted to myself that that was what I wanted because I wasn't sure that I could. I really doubted myself. Again, that imposter syndrome. I was like, oh, I can't ever know as much as the people on that team do. I'm probably just best here, like holding people accountable and pushing through. And the director of that team took me under his wing and started mentoring me a little bit because I was kind of empowering a lot of his team to be successful. But there was a clear line between, hey, I'm tracking progress versus, hey, I'm actually being the voice of what we should do and why, right? And he wanted me to come over to his team. And I was like, are you sure that's a good idea? Which is a really silly thing to say when like the director of a team is asking you to go take a job, right? But I really doubted myself and thought about it for almost a month before I agreed and talked to other friends in the workplace. I was very uncertain and very worried about if I'd be good enough. I would have been the only woman architect on the team. How was I going to speak with such authority and competency that I saw the other people on the team do? And it was very scary, honestly, at first. I decided to take the job, but then, both to bolster my own confidence and also just because there were things I needed to get more smart on, I did a lot of studying and a lot of work in my own time to kind of build up my confidence. Whether I needed to do that much work to build up my confidence, probably not. Like I think looking back, I knew plenty. But for me to feel confident, what I needed at the time was to kind of put in that extra work to have that confidence in those kinds of meetings and conversations.
Thank you for sharing that. Our next question is similar to what you all have said as it relates to imposter syndrome and starting a new role and what have you done to essentially overcome that? If you can all each share one piece of advice that you would give to someone who's currently facing this, what would that be? We can start off with you, Sara.
So the piece of advice I would give is don't give up. When you're doubting yourself and you're really questioning, kind of the most comfortable thing to do is to give up, take a step back. But I would say push yourself to try. And especially if it's an area you aren't familiar with or you don't know well, there are going to be, especially if it's with a technology, there's going to be failures. It's not going to work the first time, especially if you're building something. And that's okay. Probably one of the most useful skills I ever built in that area was learning how to troubleshoot, not just how to use a tool, but how to understand when that tool doesn't work and why, and the process for figuring that out. And I didn't understand that that was its own skill set until maybe 5 years ago, which is over 10 years into my career. I really wish I would have figured that out sooner. So, you just have to keep trying and keep pushing, even when it seems like it might be impossible, because it's not.
Thank you. Adanna?
The advice that I would give is to not self-select out of anything, especially if you're applying to maybe a new job or wanting to ask for a raise, because when you're applying to these new positions, you don't know, they may have one thing on the job listing, but there are a lot of other hidden criteria that they may be looking for that you may not even know about. So even if you may not think you're the perfect candidate, you actually might be. So having the courage to keep applying and not self-selecting out is something that's very important.
Thank you. Maria?
Yeah, sure. Mine's very similar to what Adanna said. Um, you know, when I felt like I had kind of mastered the technical account manager role that I was in, and I was starting to look around, really, I just applied to anything and everything, even things that I was clearly not qualified for. And you know, just applied to everything. So that would be my advice. And also, as someone who has written job descriptions and posted them, I will tell you that we are not always hiring for exactly what the job description says. So even if you only meet, you know, 1 or 2 out of the 10 requirements that we have listed, just apply anyways, because you never know. But also, once you do get hired, and yes, there's always a big learning curve once you get hired into a new role or you change roles. Just remember, you were hired for a reason. They didn't just randomly select you, right? So keep that in mind as you start to get that imposter syndrome, like, oh my gosh, there's so much to learn in this new role. I don't know what I'm doing. Lean on your team and remember that you were hired for a reason.
Thank you for sharing all that wonderful advice. Right. As of right now, I don't see any questions in the Q&A. But please, for anyone attending, any question that you have for our panelists, please share it with us so they can answer that. Moving on to the next question. What are barriers, both visible and invisible, that discourage women from pursuing a career in technology? And what can educators and industry professionals do to encourage more women considering this field? We can start off with you, Maria.
Sure. So I think, you know, a lot of what we see in media is not necessarily accurate. So, like growing up, I thought that a career in technology was just coding, right? That's why I wanted to be a coder, because that's what I thought that a career in technology is. So I learned over time that that's not true. There's so many different careers in technology, but definitely we need more awareness around the fact that there is more to the technology field than just coding. So I would definitely say that if educators and industry professionals can work to kind of dispel those myths that we see in media where like it's just coders and hackers and everyone's wearing black sweatshirts with their hoods up all the time in dark rooms, definitely not the reality of it. So I think if we can just be more clear about what's available.
Thank you. Adanna?
So one of the most important things would be to show what a journey into that field looks like and different types of ways that journey works. Because with game development, I didn't even know that games writing was a job that existed before I graduated Penn State. I thought that was something that all the programmers did when they were making games. It was like programmers, artists, musicians, and seeing that games writing was a career and it was one that there were many different paths into. Like I've had colleagues that have come from TV writing, some that have come from animation writing, some that have just come from regular print book writing. So seeing the different ways that you can achieve your goals within the career is really helpful in learning from other people's lived experiences.
Thank you. Sara?
I'm gonna echo what Maria said in understanding what all opportunities are actually out there. You know, when you think about different roles in IT or in cybersecurity, you know, people think about cybersecurity jobs, but there are at least a dozen different types of jobs or careers you can have in cybersecurity alone, and even more in IT. Some of them involve writing code and some of them don't. And understanding that and making that kind of more accessible for what your options are, I think would also help a lot too.
Awesome. Thank you. We do have one question in the Q&A. Maria, would you like to answer that so everyone else can also benefit from your answer?
Yeah, sure. I was actually just typing a response to it. So the question in the chat is, are there specific skills you gained during your time as a consultant that helped you when you made the transfer to your account manager role? I would say that being a consultant is a very good place to start out in a career. For me, it was a very uncomfortable role, right? Because these customers or clients, they're paying a lot of money for you to come on site and give them advice. And especially as like a 22, 23-year-old, I was like, what authority do I have to be giving these industry professionals advice? But you really get to go to a lot of different types of organizations and customers, and you get to learn like how differently organizations do things. Like, the way one organization manages their IT is completely different from another's. Everyone's doing things their own way. And so you get to learn about that. You kind of get to learn about the politics side of things. You get to learn a little bit about sales, how to position things in a way that can influence people. That's an important skill. And then also, the type of consultant I was a technical consultant. So just gaining those technical skills also helped me when I transitioned to an account manager role, because then when I was in the account manager role and I was talking to my customers, they said, oh, okay, like, she knows the technology, she knows what's going on. So that really, really helped in terms of relationship management to gain that trust. Being a consultant, I think, is a very uncomfortable role, but a mentor once told me that when you're uncomfortable, you're learning. So I kind of took that to heart, and it's still true to this day, I think.
Thank you for answering that question. Yeah, right. So the next question, okay, we have another question in the chat. How does one go from about detaching their value as a person from their value to the field or industry? We can start off with Sara.
Yeah, so this is a really good question, and it can be really tough sometimes, especially in the world that we live in, right? It feels a lot like how much you make, how much money you have, what you can afford really ties to your worth as a person. And so that can require a lot of personal work to understand that that's not true, right? There can be really some mental health challenges with that too. Um, at the end of the day, what you do and who you are, right, has very little to do with this company that you've signed a contract with that is going to give you money for things you do for them, right? When you think about it. And so I've found focusing on that to be really helpful. I do work for a company, that company pays me, but who is Sara Gori, right? And what worth does Sara Gori have, in my life is different. And it's something to think about, and it can be a journey on itself just to kind of get to that point where you reach that comfort. But it's definitely something I would encourage you to, work on and aspire to. At least for me, it's just made life a lot easier. And remembering that your relationship with an employer or a company is a contract that you have with them where you're doing work for them and they're paying you for that work, which is only a part of who you are, right? And so remembering that is really important.
Thank you. Adanna?
I think to answer this question, the most important things you can do is work-life balance, and even making sure you like cultivate your life outside of work. Because one of the things I struggled with when I first got into games is because I would use video games to de-stress after work. Now that I'm working on games, it's like my work brain could never turn off. And that's something that's not healthy, leads to a lot of burnout. So finding other avenues, whether it was like maybe going to the park with friends, maybe it was like learning how to paint and taking painting courses, and just trying to finding ways to enjoy and experience life outside of work, and figuring out who you really are outside of all of that.
Thank you. Maria?
Yeah, both Sara and Adanna gave great answers. I completely echo what they said. Making sure that you're making time. Also, in this era of remote work, I've in my 10 years at Microsoft, I've never been assigned to an office. I've always been a remote worker. it can be really easy to just work from sun up to sundown without even realizing it. So definitely don't let your life pass away just doing work.
Thank you. Moving on to the next question. What was the most pivotal moment in your career when you knew that you were doing exactly what you were supposed to do, or when you realized that you were meant to be? We can start off with you, Maria.
Sure. So I guess most of the roles I'm in, I interviewed for and got selected for, but kind of like the time when I really knew that I made it, I guess, would be when I was asked to join this, secret product that we hadn't announced yet, which turned out to be Microsoft Copilot for Security. It's an AI product for cybersecurity use cases. But being asked to join a product and a role, that was like, okay, like I must be doing a good job if they're asking me to do this really important thing. So, that doesn't always happen. And I would say we should never expect to just be, asked to take a position. But that was something in my own personal career when I was like, okay, yeah, like things are going well.
Thank you. Adanna?
I think one of the moments where I realized I was exactly where I needed to be was when in earlier this year, me and some other colleagues were in an organization called Black in Gaming. We did a panel at a games event called MagFest discussing what it's like being a Black game developer, whether you are in the indie or AAA space. And while we were there, we were at this Black owned cheesecake shop. And when the lady saw us, she asked if we were there for the convention. And when we told her that we were all developers, she was so excited because for all of her years of being there at this same event, she'd never seen any Black game developers. And knowing that, it filled her with so much joy, knowing that other people also just don't know how many Black game developers are there and how we have to make ourselves visible, and the work that we're doing visible was something that really stood out to me, and how I'm in the right place and I'm doing exactly what I need to do.
Thank you. Sara?
I don't have one pivotal moment that really showed me that I made it, but I have a series of breadcrumbs of memories that have kind of given me the warm fuzzies and reinforced that I was in the right place and doing things that I was proud of. And just in terms of being in the right place, honestly, was when I started my career working on the incident response team. I couldn't think of anything cooler than like finding cyber bad guys and defending against them. It felt a little cops and robbers, and I just thought it was the coolest thing. And the fact that I could feel that way about a career just made me so excited, right? But in terms of being where you want to be and knowing you're in the right place, one of the things that has been so important to me, there was a shift in my career, maybe 8 years in, where I was so happy with my choice to be in cybersecurity in my career. It's fun, it's interesting, it's stable, that I really started looking out more to how can I help other people, be in that same place, because it is such a really wonderful place to be. And so another small memory I have was a female coworker confided in me that they were thinking of changing roles, and it would have brought them away from my project, but I was happy for them, and instead sat them down and coached them on negotiating, was like, let's make sure you can make the most money possible, right? And trying to do more outreach to help other people be successful. And the fact that I have been able to do that has really helped me feel that I am in the right place, because I want to help the people who are coming after me too.
Thank you for sharing that. Moving on to the next question. Speaking of mentorship and helping other women succeed, who are some of your role models or inspirations in the technology field or in your specific field or community today, and why? Oh, we can go back to you, Sara.
So I would say that this is something that I struggled with early on in my career. There weren't a lot of technical women around me for the beginning of my career. Every team I was on, I was the only woman except for a project manager or an HR person that supported the team for many years. And so that made that a struggle for a little while. Um, at some point in my career, I got a job as an architect where the my manager was a woman, her director was a woman, and our CISO was a woman. So I went from no exposure to having an entire leadership chain suddenly of role models, how they comported themselves, how they dressed, which is a lot more important than a lot of people think, and just how they operated in their spaces and how they took up space or commanded a room when they needed to, because it's different. And that just changed how I thought about how I could operate as a professional. It meant so much to me to have that in my career.
Thank you. Adanna?
So one of the most important role models I've had in the games industry has been organizations like Black in Gaming, Black Girl Gamers, Game Developers of Color, and POC in Play, because just having that community of other diverse professionals in games to just reach out and talk to, whether it's asking about, oh, have you worked with this studio before? What's your experience like? Or, oh, I'm thinking of updating my portfolio. What should I do? And having those connections has just been really, really helpful, especially seeing them in person at the Game Developers Conference last week, because especially as someone who works remote, it can be very isolating when you're working remotely from a team, and having these virtual communities to stay connected with has been really, really helpful.
Thank you. Maria?
Yeah, sure. So when I think about my role models or inspirations in technology, I like to think about both my mentors and my sponsors. So I would highly recommend having both a career mentor and a technical mentor if you're in a technical role. Because over time, those have become people who have really helped me in my career and who I really respect. And some of these mentors I've had for nearly 10 years. So I know that I can trust them. I can go to them, even if, we're not on the same team or anything, but I could say, hey, this is what's going on. Can you help me? So I really, value them as role models, but also I have had some sponsors over the year, career sponsors, which is different from a mentor. I can have kind of like higher level discussions on career progression, like, hey, I'm looking at this role based on everything we've talked about. What do you think about this for me? Or what do you think I need to do to be able to get this role? So definitely those would be my role models or inspirations in technology.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We don't have any questions in the Q&A as of right now, so we can move on to the next question we have. This relates back to the, one sec. Okay, going back to mentorship and finding someone that you can confide in and lead you in the right path, not only as in career, but also in the technical role. How would you approach finding mentors or talking about, or the difference between mentors as sponsors? And Maria, you start us off.
Sure. So there's definitely a big difference between mentors and sponsors. Mentors are people that typically you can go to for anything. Like, for example, with my mentors, I typically meet with them maybe like once a month or something, and we just do a check-in and we talk about like the day-to-day things that are going on. Maybe we vent to each other a little bit, and we talk about that. And my mentors are all at like a higher level than me, but they're not super, super high up. And I found them just kind of naturally by talking to people and naturally developing this kind of mentorship relationship where eventually we were just kind of like, hey, like mentor and mentee, it kind of just happened. So definitely network and talk to people and see who, like, look at people on the team who you think are doing a really good job and who you respect, and try to say like, hey, like, I really like what you're doing. Would you mind like having a call with me? And you can form a relationship from there. Sponsors are a little bit different. So I've had a few sponsors. Usually they're pretty high up in the management chain, like VP level or higher. And it can be a little bit harder to get a sponsor, but I started with my own team. I kind of went like 2 or 3 levels up and started like, reaching out to her. She happened to be a woman, so I felt more comfortable, and I was like, hey, like, I'd love to set up some time to talk. And over time, we kind of just developed a sponsorship relationship, and I did formally ask her. I formally asked her to be my sponsor, and she said yes. But basically, since she was very high up in the organization, and we would have a call like quarterly with each other, or maybe twice a year. When I was applying to new roles, I could go to her and say like, hey, I applied to this new role within Microsoft. Can you reach out to that hiring manager and put a good word in for me? So then, like, when the hiring manager sees like, oh, this like VP level person is advocating for this candidate, like maybe I should take a little bit of a closer look at this candidate, right? So there's kind of that difference. So a mentor can help you with a lot of different things in your career, but a sponsor can really kind of advocate for you to advance in your career.
Thank you. Adanna?
So for finding mentors, one of the key parts is definitely not being afraid to reach out to people. Because I know for finding my mentors, I did a lot of reaching out, whether it was on LinkedIn or whether it was on different like in gaming discords, and just reaching out with people to connect with them, learn more about them, and say, hey, maybe this is someone who would be a good mentor for me, who's been in the industry longer, knows a lot how different things work, knows how the different things you need in order to make a successful game. Whereas a sponsor may be someone higher up in a company who can advocate for you when you're not there. And the key thing is, like I said previously, not being afraid to reach out and not self-selecting out and, oh, they worked on so many cool things, they wouldn't have time for me. A lot of people are more than open to talk about their experiences and how they've gotten to the places that they've gotten, but you do have to reach out first. So reaching out first and being respectful of their time is the key thing to getting a mentor.
Thank you. Sara?
I think about the difference between a mentor and a sponsor as internal support for the mentee versus external advocacy, like Maria was saying, and like Adanna was saying. To find a mentor, not being afraid to ask is kind of step one, like Adanna was saying. And that can be scary, they're doing all this cool stuff, and do they have time for you? But that's also up to them to decide if now is too busy. You don't know what's going on in their life, but it's always worth asking, always. And it can start informally, hey, I have some questions, do you want to chat? I was wondering if I could pick your brain. And if informal isn't your style, you can always just ask directly too. And that's okay. Hey, would you be interested? Do you have time to have this kind of relationship? And then you can discuss what that looks like. I mean, does it mean you're meeting once a month, quarterly? There's ways to make it more or less time too. So there are definitely ways to kind of negotiate that relationship, if you will. But in terms of how to pick one, look for someone who is doing things you want to do or in ways you want to do them. It may not even be exactly the same work, but if they are operating the way you want to operate, or getting things done in a certain way, or producing something that sounds really interesting, that's a great reason to find a mentor. You could have a mentor for a short period of time or for a long period of time. I've mentored people just for a couple months to help them through a job change. I have a couple of mentors that I've been talking to for mentees that I've been talking to for 5 or 6 years. So it really varies.
Thank you for sharing that advice. The next question is, who or what continues to help you succeed, and what would you recommend to other women in tech to do for their own success? We can start off with you, Sara.
I cannot understate the importance of a network. The people you know, the relationships you build, and the people that you've worked with over time. You know, I have gotten 3 different jobs over the course of my career because I got a referral that helped me because I'd worked with them before. I knew them from someplace else. And, you know, that helped me connect to get the interview. It's just so important to have. And, you know, we don't operate on an island in the workplace. We don't operate on an island. So having that support system is absolutely critical.
Thank you. Adanna?
I'd like to second the importance of a support system and a network because when you're in whatever field you're working in, you're not going to know as soon as you enter it, you're not going to know everything about that field. What are the best practices? What are the best places to work for? And the best way to learn that is through connecting with people and learning from their own experiences. And just because you want to have a large network, that doesn't mean that you're telling everyone everything. You can cultivate that. So like maybe you keep some things to your mentors, maybe you only talk to your coworkers about some things. So that way it's easier for you to manage and also much more helpful in aligning with your goals and what you want to do in the long term. So building a strong network and a support system, even both, especially one outside of work as well, is extremely important.
Thank you. Maria?
Yeah, I definitely echo what both Sara and Adanna said. One thing that's really helped me succeed is learning what other people are good at. So I am on a very diverse team. We all were like hand chosen for this team, and we all come from different backgrounds and different technologies that we previously supported. So knowing what each person on my team is good at has really helped me succeed because then I know like, oh, I have a question about this. I'm going to go talk to this person, or you know, just having that network and knowing what people are good at can really help you out.
Thank you. Currently, we have 9 minutes left on this panel. Are there any thoughts or additional tips from the panelists that you would like to share of anything that we didn't touch on based on the questions that were asked today? We can start off with you, Maria, if you want to share anything.
Sure. I would say, you know, just like we talked about the importance of networking, definitely, especially at the beginning of your career, just reach out to people, reach out on LinkedIn. If you don't know them, reach out to people within your company and just make connections. But also, a lot of times in the corporate world, things are seeming to be an emergency, right? There's a lot of urgency in the corporate world. Don't take things too seriously. No one is dying. Allow yourself the space to work in the way that you work best and don't get caught up in all of that corporate urgency, I would say would be my advice there.
Thank you. Adanna?
Some of the advice that I'd recommend is, as I stated earlier, don't self-select out, but also don't be afraid of taking opportunities, even if you're not a 100% fit. And this goes for whether it's with jobs or even if it's with industries, because even if it doesn't look like something you'd like to work on originally, it could still be pretty interesting. Like I was reached out to write for an article in games. And even though I mostly do writing for games and research writing, article writing isn't something I've done a lot. It was still a really great experience to have and something that, even though I didn't consider it, it was still really great to do. So not being afraid to step out of your comfort zone, whether it's within like your job or industry, is really important.
Thank you. And Sara?
I think one of the themes in a lot of these questions and what we've talked about has been about things like imposter syndrome and how do we face challenges. And, you know, we're not always qualified 100% of the time to do everything that we might sign up for, and that's okay. And I think when you're faced with those things, you know, there's going to be worry, there's going to be some fear, and there's going to be some doubt. And one of the things that's always helped me is thinking with intention what would make me feel empowered and more confident at the time. Instead of just letting the doubt and the worry win, thinking about what I can do to lift myself up. And that might come from a support system. It might come from other people. It might come from inside me, sometimes a little bit of both. But finding those ways to focus on how you grow yourself and how to pick yourself up and how to pick up the people around you uh, is how at least I've worked through that in my career. So I challenge everyone to think a little intentionally about how they can feel more empowered in what they do.
Thank you. We have one question in the Q&A chat that says, do you find yourself finding PSU alumni in your jobs that you connected with? Would anyone like to answer that?
I'll go. In just about every job, at just about every employer, I have come across PSU alumni. In my current job, even right now, someone on our chat platform has the Penn State logo, and it turns out I worked with him very closely, but was able to go off the bat, hey, you went to Penn State, so did I, which immediately helped that relationship, right? So, we talk about network, but you already have one right here that's professional that you will have after you graduate, which is great.
Yeah, that's the same experience I've had too. Like, not only Penn State, but there are two other people at Microsoft who graduated from IST specifically, and they're in completely different parts of the company than I am, but our paths always cross like every couple of years. It's like, hey, So definitely the Penn State family is strong.
In the tech jobs that I worked before moving into games, I also met a lot of Penn State alumni, but in games, I'm also in like the indie sphere, so that might probably be why at some of the bigger companies, like maybe PlayStation, Xbox, there would probably be more alumni. But in indie games, I actually haven't seen that many Penn State alumni, which has been interesting.
Great, thank you. We do have one question in the Q&A chat. I'm just afraid that we'll run out of time and not have enough time to answer the question. But if anyone feels strongly about answering this question, you can answer it. And it's, since the tech world is always changing, how do you go about learning entirely new, different technical skills?
I can go, I guess. So definitely things are always changing. What I like to do is, one, I like to lean on people who I perceive to be experts in a technology. So I might ask them like, hey, can you help me with this? Another thing that I do is like, I'm fairly new to the world of cybersecurity. So like I will get like a study guide or a book for like the Security Plus exam. Like there's I have this book right here, and like the Security Plus is an exam, but like you don't have to take the exam. You can just get the study guide and start reading about it. So, or just learn by doing, build yourself a lab and just practice a new technology if you want. So there's lots of different ways, lots of different good YouTube videos, different resources are out there.
I want to echo Maria's statement about building a lab. What I think is really key is having a low stakes way to get some experience with something new. It can be tough to learn a brand new technology when you're doing it in a professional setting, where you have to go and deliver something successful. And well, that might happen sometimes. Really, you want to build a space where it's okay to fail. It's okay when it doesn't work. It's okay when you're, fighting the tool to get it operating. That's a part of learning. And so giving yourself a space where you can do that is why having a lab or a lab-like space can be so important.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing and participating. Thank you all to our panelists who have paved the way for us and for giving us your time to speak with us today.